Welcome to Her Extraordinary Life by Design, where we celebrate women who are shaping their lives one extraordinary day at a time. I'm your host, Leslie Gaudet, self-care coach for women who are ready to make self-care a priority to support them in life and business. Every week, I'll be speaking with inspiring women from various walks of life who will share their personal journeys and will discover how they have fearlessly carved their own paths as business owners, passionately pursuing their dreams and creating a meaningful impact on their communities. So let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to Extraordinary Life by Design podcast. I'm your host, Leslie Gaudet, and today I want to talk money because I know that for many of you listening, money decisions matter, right? Not just in a practical sense, but because they're tied to our values, our responsibilities, and our long-term impact. Whether it's how you invest, how you spend, how you plan, or even how you grow, money is something you engage with thoughtfully. And that's exactly why this conversation matters. Because when decisions are values-based, they're never just about the numbers. At least that's been my experience. They're about alignment, integrity, about how choices are made, not just what those choices are. So today's episode isn't about tactics or strategies. I'm not a money coach or a financial planner, so I won't be going down that road. But what I will lean into today is something that sits underneath all of that. What I believe that shapes decisions before the numbers are reviewed, before a plan is finalized, before a direction is chosen. Because sometimes the most influential part of a money decision isn't the information we're working with, but the internal state we're in while we're making it. Money decisions for women like you aren't casual. They carry weight, not because you don't know what you're doing, but because you do. You understand the implications, you see the long view, you know that one decision rarely stands alone. So you approach money with care. You think it through, you look beyond the surface, and you factor in responsibility, impact, and timing. And still there are moments when a decision feels heavier than you expected it. Not complicated, not confusing, just weighty. It's where planning can start to feel tense instead of supportive because there's a silent pressure underneath it, even when things are working, even when the numbers make sense, and even when a decision is sound. There's often a subtle urgency present, the kind that hums in the background. And what usually gets overlooked in those moments isn't intelligence, preparation, or strategy. It's the internal state the decision is being made from, the emotional and energetic layer underneath the logic, because it's not about knowing more or doing better. It's about steadiness and whether that steadiness is available when the decision is being made. What's interesting is that money decisions don't usually begin with numbers. They begin earlier than that. They begin with how you're holding things internally before you ever sit down to review a plan or to look at options. Sometimes there's a sense of steadiness. Other times there's a quiet tension, not enough to stop you, but enough to shape how you move. And that internal state shows up long before anything looks logical on paper. And what often goes unnoticed is how much energy that requires. Not the energy of deciding, but the energy of managing the internal pressure around the decision, carrying the responsibility, holding multiple outcomes at once, staying composed while moving things forward. And over time, that pressure can start to feel normal. So normal, in fact, that decisions feel heavier than they should, even when nothing's wrong. And then there are moments when something shifts, where the decision feels cleaner, less strained, more supported internally. And not because the strategy changed, but because the state you were in while deciding it did. You see, when steadiness leads, urgency doesn't have to. That's when clarity feels simpler and strategy stops doing the work of compensating for internal strain. And this is the lens that I want to explore with you today. There's this belief that often goes unquestioned when it comes to money, especially when you take responsibility seriously. It's the idea that steadiness comes after the information is complete, that clarity arrives once the plan is fully tightened, that if you stay with the numbers a little longer, the decision will eventually settle internally. And that's because money decisions carry consequences, and you're accustomed to handling consequential things well. So it feels reasonable to keep gathering data, to take another pass through the numbers, to keep checking, to stay in review a little longer, because you care about getting it right the first time. What's less obvious is how this belief actually shows up, because it looks like reaching outward when something doesn't feel fully settled, like another spreadsheet, another projection, another layer of reassurance, adding structure instead of pausing, more analysis instead of space, more logic instead of noticing what's happening internally. And it feels sensible because you've learned that money decisions deserve thought, they deserve care, they deserve to be defensible. But when something feels slightly off, the instinct isn't to stop, it's to look harder, to tighten the plan, to make the numbers cleaner, to remove as much uncertainty as possible. And what often goes unrecognized is that the unsettled feeling isn't coming from missing information, it's coming from the internal state present while the decision is being made, the very state that this belief teaches you to override, convincing you to trust the data more than you trust your internal signals, and to assume that if something feels tense, the answer must be external. So over time, that becomes the default way of relating to money, because you've learned that responsibility means control, that pressure is part of the process, and that feeling unsettled is just the cost of doing important things well. Which means that the energy you're in while making financial decisions gets ignored. The subtle urgency, the tightness in your chest, the shortness of breath, or the sense of holding too much at once, those signals don't get named, they just get managed. And the belief reinforces itself, telling you that once you have the right information, this will feel better. Once the numbers are perfectly lined up, then everything can settle and be finalized, that you'll finally be able to relax, that once the numbers confirm it, you'll feel steady. And I want you to know that I'm not saying that I don't believe in being diligent about your money. It's not about that. It's when you stay in analysis to create steadiness, what actually happens is something different. Because the decision may look sound, but the internal pressure remains, and the belief never addresses the real issue. It treats internal unsettledness as a problem of the numbers instead of a signal about capacity, steadiness, or state. In fact, I recently heard someone say something that really made me pause, and it stuck with me. It was on a recent podcast episode of The Faith Driven Entrepreneur, where the guest was talking about money. And he said, it's like chasing external solutions for internal problems. And that's why money behavior is never purely logical. It's shaped by how much pressure you're holding, how much responsibility you're carrying, and how much steadiness is available to you in that moment. And the belief isn't a flaw, it's a pattern. It just simply explains why even thoughtful, values-driven women can feel like money decisions take more energy than expected. Because the belief's not about money, is it? It's about finding steadiness through control instead of recognizing when steadiness needs to come first. And once you understand that, then you have the opportunity to shift, not in how you manage money, but in how you relate to the state that you're in before money ever enters the conversation. Once the belief is visible, the idea that more information will create steadiness, it becomes easier for you to see what it's been requiring of you, because beliefs like this don't interrupt life in the traditional sense. They don't derail progress. They let you keep moving forward, but they just make everything cost more internally than it needs to. And that's why the real cost is so easy to miss. Because from the outside, things often look fine. Money's being managed, plans are in motion, and responsibilities are being handled. There's no obvious signal that anything is off. And on paper, you're still capable, still composed, and still moving forward, which is exactly why the cost takes so long to name. Because what's happening isn't collapse, it's accumulation. And decisions start requiring more effort than they should because they're being carried internally for too long. And what I mean by that is that there's the decision itself, and then there's everything wrapped around it. The mental energy spent thinking it through again, the emotional energy you use to stay regulated while holding uncertainty, the pressure to get it right, not just logically, but in a way that feels defensible. And over time, that pressure starts to feel normal because you don't question it, because it doesn't feel dramatic. It feels proportionate to the weight of the decision. And so you keep reviewing, you keep managing the internal tension rather than addressing it. And you start looking for the external to do the work of internal regulation, where strategy becomes a way steadiness is pursued, structure becomes a way to quiet discomfort, and more planning becomes a way to manage pressure. So taking another look at the numbers feels like the natural next step. And listen, Strategy, structure, and planning are all great virtues to have, but that's not what I'm talking about. What I mean is that strategy, structure, and more planning are being asked to compensate for an internal state that hasn't been acknowledged. And that's where the drain begins. Not in the work, not in the numbers, not in the responsibility itself, but in the constant self regulation required to hold it all together internally. Carrying the decision privately, holding multiple outcomes in mind, staying composed while the internal signals are asking for space. That takes energy, right? And when that happens repeatedly, it creates a particular kind of fatigue, the kind where everything still functions but feels heavier than it should, where decisions feel weighty even when they're sound, where progress continues but without the sense of internal support that makes it sustainable. And because this pattern's familiar, it rarely gets noticed because pressure becomes part of normal money management. Tension becomes part of planning, and urgency hums quietly in the background, even when there's no immediate reason for it. So, although wealth may grow, opportunities may expand, responsibility may increase, steadiness doesn't automatically come with it because steadiness isn't created by accumulation, it's created by capacity. And when internal state is consistently ignored, capacity slowly erodes. Not all at once, but enough that decision making starts to cost more energy than it returns. That's the cost. Not that you can't do it, but that strength ends up carrying what hasn't been supported internally. And over time, that teaches you to rely on effort instead of alignment. You stay capable and responsible, but you're doing more internal work than you realize just to keep decisions feeling contained. And when that happens, clarity can start to feel harder to access, not because you lack the information, but because the internal environment where decisions are being made has grown crowded with responsibility, with pressure, with the unspoken expectation to manage it internally and to stay composed no matter the load. And all that does is it compresses your internal bandwidth, leaving you operating from effort instead of ease. Once you start to really see what carrying it all internally has been costing you, that's when something has the opportunity to shift. Because noticing how you experience money decisions changes the questions you ask yourself, where you stop asking, how do I keep managing at this pace? And you instead ask yourself, what would I or what do I want this to feel like instead? And you might notice it first as a moment where you imagine making a financial decision and not feeling the need to stay mentally engaged with it afterwards, or a sense of choosing and then letting the choice rest. You might start to notice how appealing it feels to sit with a decision and feel steady instead of alert, to move forward without that part of you that stays on standby just in case the numbers need to be revisited, where that longing for money decision feels less consuming, not because it matters less, but because it no longer requires so much internal effort, and where your financial decisions support you instead of asking your nervous system to stay involved long after the choice is made. You might even recognize how good it feels to trust what you notice internally without immediately questioning it or bracing against it, to experience clarity that doesn't come from tightening or checking again, but from feeling settled where you stand. And maybe what starts to surface for you is that your desire for wealth and responsibility feels like something you're in relationship with, not something you're constantly managing from the inside, where forward movement isn't driven by urgency, but by a sense of internal readiness, and where you're moving from a place that feels grounded enough to trust, where you don't need to define it, but you can feel it. You see, the shift doesn't always come with a bold decision or a dramatic change in direction. It shows up in how you notice yourself thinking. You start to catch the moments before you reach for the numbers again, before you tighten the structure, before you look for something external to confirm what you already sense. You start to recognize that even when you're capable with money, even when the numbers make sense, that the state that you're in is what shapes how the decision lands, not the decision itself, but how it lives in your body afterward. You notice a difference between making a financial decision when your energy is already taxed and making one when you feel internally steady. Because when energy is strained, decisions tend to linger. They stay mentally active. They pull you back in. They ask for continued attention, not because they're wrong, but because they were made while you were carrying too much. But when your energy is steadier, the same kind of decision, the same level of responsibility, the same amount of money at stake, that resolves itself internally instead of staying mentally active, not because the outcome's guaranteed, but because your system isn't bracing. You begin to notice that when steadiness leads, you don't need to keep re entering the decision. You don't need to manage it internally once it's been made. The numbers don't call you back in. The plan doesn't need constant monitoring for reassurance. And that's when you can see the real difference because strategy stops working overtime. It stops trying to create calm. It stops being used to stabilize what your internal state couldn't hold in the moment. And instead, strategy becomes supportive again, clean, neutral, useful. And the energy that used to stay tied up in holding, revisiting, and managing decisions becomes available again. That's the shift, where you start to realize that when energy is aligned, even high level financial decisions ask less of you and give more back. So lately, I've been paying attention to how I am with my decisions, especially the financial ones, noticing the moments right after I choose something, whether I feel finished with it or whether a part of me stays engaged, alert, or tracking it. I've started to recognize how I feel when I stay mentally involved, when I keep a decision close, keep it open, holding it just a little longer than necessary. And I also know not to allow the negative self talk in. I don't make it wrong. I just notice my patterns. And when I think back on a recent money decision, I don't start with the outcome. I start with the internal experience. What was my energy level? Was I calm when I made it or already anticipating what might need to be adjusted? Did the decision feel clear or did it carry weight with it afterward? Did it feel settled or did it linger, asking for my attention again and again? I'm starting to notice that those signals show up quickly now, before there's language, before there's logic. And I don't rush to interpret them. I let myself stay curious about what was present in me at the moment of choosing, not to analyze or to improve upon it, but just to recognize it. Because there's something revealing about seeing how often we normalize internal strain, how easily heaviness gets folded into responsibility, and how familiar it can feel to move forward while carrying more than we need to. So I pause there with the sensation, with the tone of the decision, with the way it landed. No fixing, no adjusting, just awareness, just noticing it. And that on its own begins to create space. And so as I sit with this conversation about money, what keeps coming back for me isn't strategy or planning. It's how much of the experience of money happens internally, long before anything's visible on the outside. Because money decisions don't just live in spreadsheets or bank accounts. They live in our bodies. They live in our minds. They live in the moments where you're holding responsibility, weighing impact, and staying composed, often without ever saying any of it out loud. And I think what's rarely acknowledged is how isolating that can feel. Because it's not that you don't know what you're doing, it's because you're so used to carrying it well. When you're the one expected to be steady, careful, and measured, there isn't always space to talk through the experience of money decisions, how heavy they can feel, how long they linger, and even how much internal energy they require. And I keep thinking about how different things might have been for me if there had been a place, a community where I could be a part of, where money decisions didn't have to be justified, but could be explored with others in that world who had that expertise, where responsibility didn't need explaining, where the internal pressure of managing choices and consequences could be acknowledged without being turned into a problem to solve. Not a place for advice, not a place to be told how to do it better, but a place where the experience itself was understood and one where you could feel supported by your peers. And it's why I'm so passionate about what I'm building right now, because what we've been talking about today, the internal experience of carrying responsibility, the way decisions linger, the way pressure gets managed, and how our energy can affect our financial decisions. This is just one layer of the conversations I'm beginning to create space for, because I know that this way of thinking doesn't come from theory, it comes from lived experience, and it deserves a space where it doesn't have to be explained or defended, which is why I'm building the Yes Reset community, a private invitation-only space for women in law, where inside this community, we'll spend time with the kinds of patterns we've touched on today, the ones that don't always show up on the surface, but shape how we lead, decide, and carry responsibility. These are the kinds of conversations we'll hold, the patterns we'll slow down and look at together, the moments where nothing needs to be fixed, only understood. It's not a space that will rush you to solutions, and it's not being built around telling you what to do. It's being built around creating room to notice what's actually happening internally and what changes when that experience is acknowledged instead of managed in isolation. Now, the community isn't officially open yet because I'm building it intentionally with the women it's meant to serve. So if you're listening and you're thinking, that's great. I don't need advice. I'm looking for a place where this way of thinking is understood. Or maybe you don't know that right now. Maybe you don't know exactly what you'd want yet, but something about this resonates with you. That's actually what matters most at this stage. Because as I'm building this, I'm not guessing what women in law need. I'm listening and paying attention to how you experience responsibility, decisions, and pressure, and letting that shape what this community becomes. So if you simply want to start a dialogue and have some questions, you can reach out to me by email, and you'll find my email in the show notes. Or you can apply through the link in the show notes to join the waitlist and share what you'd want a space like this to hold so that I can build it in a way that actually reflects how you think, decide, and carry responsibility, the kind of support you would like to see inside the container, and building it together. So again, be sure to check the show notes. Now, before you head out for the rest of your day, I just want to say that money decisions don't usually end when the numbers are finalized. They end only when you feel settled inside them. Because as women, we're so used to carrying responsibility quietly without naming what it costs internally. And when it comes to wealth that lasts, it's not built only through smart choices or careful planning. It's built through the internal steadiness that allows those choices to be made without urgency, without bracing, without lingering tension. Because when decisions are made from that place, they don't follow you home. They don't require constant mental engagement. They don't ask your nervous system to stay involved long after the work is done. They simply stand firm. And I think that's the shift many women are ready for. Not doing less, not carrying less, but experiencing money in a way that supports the life they're already living. So my hope for you as you think about how you manage money is that you begin to notice how you experience it, what feels steady, what feels heavy, what settles quickly, and what doesn't. Because wealth built in alignment starts internally, and when it's built from there, it lasts externally. Thanks for tuning in today. Until next time, keep dreaming, keep believing, and keep designing your extraordinary life one day at a time. Thank you for joining me on Her Extraordinary Life by Design. I hope you've been inspired and empowered by the incredible stories shared on this show. If you enjoyed this episode and the conversations we've had, I would greatly appreciate if you could take a moment to leave a review. Your feedback and support mean the world to me, and it will help others discover the podcast and join our empowering community. Remember to hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Together, we can continue to learn from these amazing women, uncover their extraordinary journeys, and be motivated to create our own lives by design. Thank you again for tuning in. Until next time, stay empowered and keep shaping your extraordinary life one day at a time.
Why is it that games make us feel so good or completely rage quit? These emotions we feel are mostly not an accident. People like me designed them. I'm Chris Cross, and this is Brain Arcade, a podcast all about the psychology of game design and why games hit us so hard. Each week, I bring on a new guest, designers, psychologists, storytellers, to break it all down with me. If you play, design, or just love games, follow now.
Electricast. Hi, I'm Geraldine Glass, and I'm excited to share a new healing music offering, an extended version song called Joy Reboot, a unique fusion of pop, classic, rap, soundscapes, and funk to inspire collaboration and bring unity through sound. For us, Joy Reboot is music medicine, out now with Electricast Records. Electricast.